Everybody, welcome to the Bottom Line. Super excited about this episode today. A heavy episode, an episode that I believe will touch your heart. Very, very special guest in studio today. Before we start, I want to thank Storyville Coffee. We drink Storyville Coffee. Storyville Coffee, when you drink Storyville Coffee, you're helping us rescue children from human trafficking. Every cup of coffee makes a difference. Why don't you check out StoryvilleCoffee.com. No special code because the whole organization is aimed at search and rescue, rescuing victims of human trafficking. Thanks to Melanie and her team. If you subscribe to Storyville Coffee, you are getting the #1 coffee roaster shipped to your house. You can curate your own box package and decide the amount of time in between deliveries. So why don't you check out Storyville Coffee? And thanks to the Storyville team for giving us great coffee, but helping us rescue lives. In studio today, welcome, Siranush Sargsyan.
Mm-hmm.
Close enough?
Yes.
Welcome to the Bottom Line. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I am excited about a conversation, I think, Siranush, that most Americans don't have the conversation because, I was raised in South Africa. Mm-hmm. Small country, prospectively, which means we learn a lot about international politics. Mm-hmm. We have to.
Yes.
We went through sanctions for decades, and so then you're forced to look at the rest of the world. Americans tend to not learn about international politics. At school, definitely not. So there's atrocities, human rights violations, genocides happening in our day, in 2024 around the world, that the average American is not even aware of and doesn't understand. And this is something that's very real to you. I'd love for you to, if you could, just give us a little bit of a background, where you're born, a little bit of your upbringing, what that was like. And then I'd love to take a bit of a journey with you in learning from you what's happening in areas of the world that we're not aware of.
Well, thank you again for inviting me. So I was born and grown up in Artsakh, which for international recognized as Nagorno-Karabakh. So I was grown up near one of the oldest churches, Christian church, Amaras, and my childhood was during Soviet time. So our country was part of big Soviet Union. And then when Soviet collapsed in 1988, because in my region, we were all Armenians, and we want to become part of Armenia, because during Soviet time, we were cut from Armenia. We all were in the same that Soviet country, but like other autonomous oblasts in Azerbaijan, and Armenia, Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh were all part of this big Soviet Union. So when Soviet collapsed, we wanted to be part of Armenia, but of course Azerbaijan was not agree with this, and the war started. There were pogroms in Azerbaijan. So a lot of Armenians were living in Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijanis living in Armenia. So, of course, they answered our peaceful protest with pogroms. Many people were killed during these pogroms, and also during war, which last 6 years. Both sides actually lost a lot of people, and also kids were killed. So part of my childhood was in this war. But then when we had ceasefire, and we were not recognized. Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh was not recognized, but we have all our institutions, democratic institutions. During these more than 30 years, we were working on it, and we were waiting for that peace, which was unfortunately only desired for us. And then 2020 war started when Azerbaijan decided like take control with weapon, take control territory, and of course it was done by Turkish support. And after 2020 war, Artsakh lost most of its territory and only 25% we have. And from other regions, all these internally displaced people were already living in Stepanakert and around. So then Russian peacekeepers were involved, but then first of all, it started like an information blockade because the ceasefire was peacekeepers were there, but even Armenians from Armenia couldn't come to our region. I'm not talking about foreigners. So it was like we were like in a black hole, and I started to report like what's going on, how these people live, survive.
And we're talking here about 2020.
Yes, after 2020.
Yeah, in the middle of COVID.
Yes, the war started. I want to say like when war started in Artsakh, we have only 7-8 cases of COVID. But after 2 days, because 1,000 people came, soldiers, journalists. So the third day in shelters, and because it was very dangerous, Azerbaijan, with help of Turkey, they use a lot of drones. So they were like literally day and night shelling whole city, whole residential area. So most of time people were staying in a shelter, and imagine everyone was ill and soldiers were ill, and in that condition, and like after several days, like everyone, most of them were ill. But you know, when there is a shelling, when there is a cluster bombs, you don't think about COVID. You
exactly.
just want to survive.
It's a higher priority as war.
Yes, but started. I think this is also important to mention. They specially use it. They use it.
I was going to ask you, do you think the timing of COVID was intentionally a time for them to say strike now?
Definitely, and also it was a time when in United States should be election, and yes, they were very, very prepared for that, and they use it, and they succeeded, of course, because our army, it was not prepared for this kind of war. They use thousands of drones, they use white phosphor, and it was something new which we were not used to see. We had war before, but when soldiers, fight to each other. So, but in this war, even, in war, even soldiers should be given some rights, yes, to fight. But our soldiers, they couldn't even reach their places. They were just hit by drones and killed. And most of them were young conscript soldiers, like 18, 20 years.
At this time, just for context, and man, I think there's so much to learn from this conversation right now, because history repeats itself, and normally it takes an amount of time. I feel like history is repeating itself very quickly. I want to talk about the Russia-Ukrainian war, the Azerbaijan war on your people. How big at that time was your population?
Well, before 2020 war, our population was almost 150,000, 48, I suppose. But after 2020 war, most of people, of course, they were during war, this 44-day war, they were in Armenia because it was not safe in Nagorno-Karabakh. So, but immediately after war, most of them came back, and we have approximately 120,000 living in Nagorno-Karabakh till the end of 23 of September, when we had to leave.
So if we talk about the international conversation about minority groups, and we're talking about a nation of 120,000 people, we put 110,000 people into the Dallas Cowboys Stadium this past Sunday for a football game. talking about a nation of 120, 140,000 people. COVID strikes. Azerbaijan, evil always says, don't let a good opportunity go to waste. They look at it as a great opportunity to strike. Ironically, in an election year in the United States,
Yes.
there's something about election year and the run-up to election years in the United States when the U.S. is going through a transition, for good or bad. In that election year, I find that the whole world is vulnerable. You look at coming out of an election cycle from Trump to Biden, Putin strikes. Do you think that a strong or weak perception of America influences these kind of activities around the world? Do you think it plays a role?
I do believe that it's not only decision of Azerbaijan. Of course, it's their decision to take this territory, but it was succeeded because these other big countries, who, by the way, during more than 30 years were involved in negotiation process. United States, France, and Russia were part of this negotiation process, and we delegate these countries to solve peacefully our case, our dispute. Yes, it was dispute. So, but they couldn't solve it, but also they were silent when Azerbaijan did it. When Turkey used, why not, also American weapon. There is a fact how they, and this is kind of weapon they can't use against of Armenia, but they did it, and they could succeed it because there was no real action.
Correct.
There was some talks.
Yeah, but not
there is
really.
some talks even now, but there is no real action. And it was also after 2020 war, during blockade, like almost 10 months, people starving. It was real starvation siege. They put people in that concentration camp. It was like camp when you are there, and there are some countries, some some people who watching how you survive. First day they cut gas, next day electricity, other day connection with internet and phone, and in winter, like kids, people.
We're talking about winter in that territory of the world is freezing winter.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that winter was very, very like literally freezing. And we were in our houses, we were like sitting in a coat. And kids in that condition, they were going to school, still going to school. And when like every day you are reporting it, you are talking about it, but there is no attention. There was no attention from these big international media because maybe they didn't see like people were literally dying in a street and there were no lot of blood or something. So it was not interesting. And then only when all population had to leave, when Azerbaijan attacked, imagine after more than 9 months, exhausted, like physically, emotionally, every kind. And soldiers were starving also. So, and in that condition, they just attack. So what kind of, and you don't have
You
choice.
cannot mount up a resistance. There's no way to mount up a resistance. You said something earlier, the role Turkey played in that war. What is happening today with Christians in Turkey, the persecution of Christians in your region is a 2024 issue. We see persecutions of Christians in Sudan, South Sudan, North Sudan today. We're looking at beheadings of Christians when people pray in public. I mean, I think there's a disconnect for the American Christians to understand the freedoms we have in this country to on a Sunday drive to church and worship, or on a Wednesday afternoon, or for right now on the air on a show for me to pray and talk about God, the freedoms. Can you talk a little bit about those freedoms? Because you talked about being raised right by the church. I mean, the role of the church in wartime, in your family, your faith, your hope, the persecution of faith. I mean, can you share a little bit with us about that?
So, to understand, so in my country, every village has at least one or two churches. Like in everywhere there are churches, and churches it's not like we during Sunday we go and pray there. No, it was part of our life. In the church which I mentioned, which was built, Amarash Church was built 4-5 century during like the first where Christianity already was adopted in Armenia. So and near these churches there is a church, there is a valley, and we have our family personally have, and our villagers, vineyard, mulberry orchard. So with our relatives, with our families, friends, we all go every year and do harvest together. So it was our life. It was so connected. So it's not only like spiritually, like
it's part of your life.
It's part of our
your
lives.
lifestyle.
And so now when we all had to leave, so and physically we literally uprooted from that place. Now our faith in danger, because we don't have that access. We can't go now these churches, and it's also about our cemeteries, which also so every family lost at least one or two members of their families. So and we left also their their graves there. So
their bodies
we don't
graves.
have access. So for these families, every day they are, they live with this grief. Like at least they don't have place to go to pray to. Of course, in Armenia, if you come to Armenia, there is amazing churches again, because it's the same country, same people. But I grown up with another church. I was baptized in another church. So it's my past, it's my life, my family life. So it's very hard to deal also with this as well. And we don't have access there. And these churches, even physically, they are in a danger, because some of them already demolished, literally demolished. And some of them, others like take their all Armenian signs, they so clean it, like change it, and representing as a Albanian church. And we had this situation already in another region, Nakhichevan, which is under Azerbaijani control now, and we have like thousands Hajj cars, which is typical for Armenian Christian culture, with stone, with crosses. So they like thousands, they literally bulldozed it, and churches there. So there is no sign. Now they will say like, oh, there were no Armenian living in Nakhichevan, but it was Armenian territory. So now the same, they did it in Western Armenia, which after first Armenian genocide, which it happened in 1915. And now we have only several remaining part of these churches in Western Armenia, now in Turkey. So, and the same they are continuing, trying to do in Artsakh, where, yes, it's also now our faith in danger, our language in danger, because we have, yes, we're all Armenians, we speak in Armenian, but we also have our specific dialects, which now also in a danger.
What would you say at the moment is the condition of the region, not just Artsakh, but the whole region, Azerbaijan, Armenia? What's the current political climate? And then a second question, who are the international players that you think are involved in a negative way, in a bad way?
So even now, the region is in a danger, and it's real, this danger. Even in Armenia now we live with this fear, like tomorrow war can start again. And because Azerbaijani authorities they openly talking about representing Armenian territory as Azerbaijani, and they will come and take it. So, and because nobody trying to do any real action to stop them, now the region is in a danger. Of course, we have very involved in this region Russia, Turkey, and I believe United States still involved. When we say negative, for me, negative also is when you not take any action, you know. Yes, Russia is more active, but because of Russia-Ukrainian war, we understand that Russia now put more attention to Ukraine, and Azerbaijan just use this situation. Why not do what they want?
Of course.
And because
but the
Turkey,
relationship between Azerbaijan and Russia, we're talking about funding.
They have very nice relationship.
Funding, ammunitions. I mean, Putin is absolutely funneling funding, munitions. Turkey, you talked earlier about Turkey would engage in a war with American weapons.
Yes.
And we have to ask ourselves these questions. How do we end up with American weapons? You know, there's a scene in the movie Iron Man. I don't know if you've ever seen the first Iron Man. But the first Iron Man movie, there's a scene where he takes fire, he gets shot, and he wakes up, and the rocket that he's shot with has his father's name on it, Stark Enterprises. And he realizes that he's being shot by an American weapon from foreigners. And yes, it's a Hollywood movie, but it's so real. So many soldiers have told me, have sat in this room, so many American soldiers have told me that they are fired upon on foreign territory with American weapons and American munitions. Somewhere the system is broken. The industrial military complex, I feel, is out of control. That's a bold statement, but I feel it's out of control. I feel at times, you know, there's a statement that the greatest business model on earth is war if you get to fund both sides of it. And there's a lot. There's a lot of players that have misrepresented our country that don't act when they should, and then you're an accomplice, you're complicit. Or we find ourselves where smaller people groups who need help are shot with American weapons by non-Americans. And these are questions I want Congress to ask in this country. These are questions that never get answered. Like, who's responsible? We're sending $200 billion to the Ukraine. Ammunitions, weapons, we're leaving military equipment in the Middle East. We're abandoning it, thinking that, you know, somehow that technology will not be used against American soldiers in the future. And now, as we're sitting here, you and I don't know if you're aware, but America is about to send soldiers back to the Middle East this week. We pull out of the Middle East. Now we're sending soldiers back to the Middle East. You know, it's so. I say this to say, voices like your voice, and you're a journalist, but you're a freelance journalist. You write incredible articles. Op-eds at times with some American publications. Can you talk to me a little bit about people supporting you? I know this times you reported to the BBC, CNN, Newsweek. You're with us on The Blaze. You're with us here on the Bottom Line. But it's changed. You've told me that it has changed. Many of these organizations have stopped working with you.
Yes, it's true, because it's how big media works. We know that, like, when it's a active war, when people dying, when people moving, like when you can see like whole country in 1 week, whole population is just living. This is real ethnic cleansing, genocide. And of course, at that moment, most of them, they are involved, they came, they report, but now nobody is interesting. Like, for example, how these people live, how these 100 already 50,000 refugees live in Armenia. It's not even political question. Mostly my stories about, by profession I am politician. However, I mostly write about like human stories, how these people deal with this tragedy, like even their social issues, how they live. For example, how much aid United States sent to Armenia for refugees, how much they sent to other countries. It's not comparable. I don't know if we should mention it, but it's very little. You can't live as a refugee with this money. It's not possible. But of course, we are some kind of privilege because we live in Armenia. It's our homeland. People take care of us, but you can't always deal with it. And most of families lost several members of their families, injured people. They need operation. They need financial support. It's not, of course, if you ask most of them, they will ask like, we would prefer to be, they will now, for us, it's a dream to go back to our country, to live. Some of them will say, oh, we dream live in that blockade without food, but in our homes when our relatives were alive.
But I think we need to talk about that, because you say refugees, but you're really talking about a whole people group, 140,000, and correct me where I'm wrong. You talk about 120 to 150,000 people displaced because of war, genocide, ethnic cleansing.
Just to mention, it's
that then
become
refugees, but it's not a refugee status of having a stable home country and departing your home country for another foreign land and a territory because you either aspire to be an American. This is by force. This is war and invasion. And yes, now refugee status is there, but I mean, you're talking about. I mean, it's stunning to hear you say that people say we'd rather be back in our home country, living in barricades with no food in the winter, but be in our place, be in our home.
Yes, because most of, just you understand, it was a small country, and so people were living in their communities. Most of this population, they never left their country. They didn't even came to Armenia, so they were very connected to their land. So
and culture,
land, yes, and culture, and for them, it's very hard. It's just most of them. They said like, we can't deal with this to live in another place. We want to go back, but how you can go back? Nobody can take their kids to that danger. And in this country, in other European countries as well, sometimes they are talking about like, yes, we have that right to return because it's our home, it's our homeland. So, but nobody is talking like, in which kind of situation, like, is there any guarantee?
What are the conditions?
Where the condition? So, because if there was a condition to stay there, they would stay. And you from Azerbaijanis usually saying like, oh, they live voluntarily. Like, it's ridiculous. Like, do you imagine any country like all of population together, they decided like, we will live. There is nothing. It's because there was no any kind of chance to stay there. So people just choose, if we can say that they had this chance to choose, like to stay and die, or to live and somehow survive.
As a I don't know if you're an active politician, former politician, but someone who is of the political class and mind frame, what is the current political makeup of your nation? Do you have good leadership? Do you feel like you have leadership that is proactively pursuing reestablishing culture?
Well, now in Armenia, people who don't know, so in 2018 we had revolution, and we have I believe, most pro-Western, first of all, and democratic country in the region. It's not only in Armenia. Let's first compare, because about Azerbaijan, we definitely can't say it's one of the most autocratic regime, dictatorship real. And we know how now a situation going in Georgia, like the government now how they're connected with Russia, and Armenia is the only democratic country. But regarding with dealing with refugees issue, so Armenia is a small country with population 3 million, and so every at least 30% is refugee. So Armenia can't alone deal with this issue, with refugees to solve their problems. Of course, they consider us as a part of society, and they are trying to do, they have some programs, like we can be integrated in Armenian society, have place to stay. Yes, if you come to Armenia, you will not see people, outside without shelter. No, because it's not our culture. Even, I was, during whole year, I was staying with someone house. I didn't know her. She just
took you in.
me. Yes, this is how we survive.
Yeah, took you in.
So yes, but
it doesn't mean the people. You made a comment before the show, and you said, "I cannot go back to my home." You cannot go back to Artsakh.
Nobody can go back. Okay, I'm a journalist. Like during this last several months, how many journalists in Azerbaijan were taken to prison? I'm not talking still about Armenian prisoners. Like Azerbaijan is like, it's not safe for to live in this country, and of course I can't go back. Yeah. Of course, for us now it's just a dream. If you are, every interview which I conducted before coming here, like almost every day I'm doing it, because journalist for me is also advocacy, because
sure,
because now we don't have government, and we are trying to, I can't just write a story and then go to sleep for me. No, it's not, because these people, they need help. So we are trying to, raise these issues, how to solve them. So every day I have some contacts, and we're talking, and all of them, they want to go back. If you ask, they want to go back, but there is no possibility. Yeah. There is no safety.
Do you
to go
see
back.
The United Nations? Talk to me about the role of the United Nations today, 2024, in this conflict. Do you see the United Nations doing anything, either as the UN or individual nations within the United Nations, the EU, Great Britain? I mean, is there anybody actively pursuing a solution?
There is only talks. As I told you, in European Parliament, in European institution, you also could, nobody is saying like we can't go back. Everyone are saying, reporting about it, but nobody is saying like how we should go. And coming back to United Nations, so this COP29, who is organizing this in Azerbaijan? So, and all this country, all these climate activists are going to go to Azerbaijan, Baku, where we still have prisoners of war. We have at least confirmed 23 prisoners who is now in a jail in Baku. And I believe most of these people, they don't even know.
I want to ask you a question. As a journalist, you write stories from the perspective of the refugees. You interview refugees. Rebecca on our team highlighted a particular story you wrote that involved a young boy. Can you talk to me just a little bit about what you hear from the people, from these stories of the human being, the human condition? What happens to people when nations forget about life and value, when people are treated like they are objects, and we lose humanity?
Yes, this is the feelings, like most of them said, like we feel like dehumanized, like they did it, and they can't deal with this ignorance and also indifference, like towards them, like why we are not seen, like why we don't exist for this world. And even like, so when 2020, after 2020 war, when most of these people went back, even they lost their housing in other in the part of Artsakh, which was already under control of Azerbaijan, but they still live in the part which were under our control, even without their home, but they're still living in their country. And after 2-3 years, they suffer this blockade. Their kids were starving, and every time they're asking, like, why? If in the end we had to leave, why they gave these promises us, why we were suffering there, why our kids had to go through all of this. And it's not only war, there were also, when people want to leave because of blockade, there was no fuel. Also, there was no medicine, there was no food, but also fuel. So to find the fuel, there was only one fuel depot. When you in the end, the representative or local government tried to give people they live. And when it's only your chance to save your family, like 1,000 people gathered that place, and there was an explosion, like, and we lost 219 people died, 22 missing still, and it's more than people we lost during Beirut explosion. But for example, everyone knows about Beirut explosion, but nobody knows about.
I think we lose.
And imagine there is a family, several families who lost. And tomorrow it happened, like exactly 1 year, and tomorrow will be 1 year when, like, I interviewed young woman, Berta. She got married during blockade, even in that condition, but she had the hope live there. And after months, in this explosion, she lost her husband, her father, her 2 brothers. Victoria, another young woman who lost her father-in-law, husband, brother-in-law. I interviewed a mother whose 2 sons still missing. She still believe, like, maybe they are alive, maybe Azerbaijanis took them to prison. But another mother, as I told you, think like she would prefer, like, her son died, but not in a prison, because he would be definitely tortured there.
Through the eyes of a child, though, when you, as we're getting close to closing the episode here, when you interview children, can you give me a perspective from the eyes of a child? I mean, how are they speaking? I mean, because children are innocent and they speak the truth.
So one of the last interview which we conducted, we were talking with a woman, and her 4-year-old girl enters to the house, and she said, "I'm Sofia, I'm from Stepanakert." I didn't ask her, but she met the first person, and her mother said, like, when she goes to kindergarten, every day she's repeating the same, like, "I'm from Stepanakert." She won't mention from which place. But kids are different. They dealing with this trauma in different way. We have kids who, after this war, they don't talk. They talked before, but now they're in a silent. My nephew, he's 6 years old, and when I ask him if he remember his house, his place, so he would always find excuse not to talk about it. He lost his father during war, and so kids are different, but it's like, in my eyes, they all grown up, because these kids, they were, during 9 months, they were standing in a line for bread. During night, they were standing in a line, and in the morning, they go to school. And then war started, and even in this last war, in one-day war, it was one day, but 24 hours, every minute it was bombing. And so they are like physically, mentally, they were like torn up, and they really wanted to go to survive. They were begging their mothers in the shelters, like, please. And there was a kid in one of the villages. There was a 9-year-old kid. He asked his mother if he will survive after war, but after that, after several minutes, rocket hit and he died with his grandmother. So we have kid who was running from school to home when Azeri started to bomb, and his heart just stopped. He didn't have any kind of issues, you know.
Yeah,
So,
the trauma and
yes,
the trauma
and
and the
now
impact.
they live in Armenia. So you know, when they, for example, in the same school, when they found some kids from their schools, imagine how they are happy. And because this is another situation, as I told you, because most of them, they always live in their communities, it's very hard when they are, you know, separated. And when they met their classmates, so it's for them, of course, it's easy to deal with this trauma. And of course, there are some organizations who try to help these kids to deal with trauma, but we need help also in this situation as well.
I was going to ask you, as we close here with about a minute or so left, what would be your call to action, your request of people watching the show? I mean, what if you had in brief, just say, look, this is, if there's one thing I want people to know and understand, it could either be a cry for help, it could be, look, you need to understand. What would be that one message you would like to send?
Well, you know, in every country, I believe war is the most disaster like you could imagine. And in every war-torn country, people suffer perhaps the same way, but every family has also its own tragedy. And we have a lot of problems now, but most of important issue now, I think, if they can speak up to stop this event in Azerbaijan, to release our prisoners, but also if there are organizations or people who can help our refugees, especially who most need it. We have a lot of thousands people who is injured, who need operation, and Armenian government, they do their best, but it's not enough. So it depends. I think they should decide, like, in which kind of question they can support us, but we need that support.
Yeah, I think it's the international community to understand. You know, I always say this: when adults behave in a way that is anti-God, that is filled with hatred and self, children suffer. And here in our organization, our focus is on liberating children, protecting children. And the sad part is, it's one thing when adults go against adults and they do stupid things and adults suffer, and that is an atrocity to see any human being suffer. But when you see 5, 7, 9-year-old children having to ask, hey, am I going to survive? That gets me very angry, because God asks us to protect the innocent, and the innocent are the children. And unfortunately, those kids carry deep trauma and wounds. And so our prayers go out to you. Our prayers go out to your nation's people. And then we start praying for God to reform Azerbaijan, and for America, who has a history with Azerbaijan, a very long history with Azerbaijan. For America to think twice about how we conduct ourselves internationally where we send money, where we send aid, ammunitions. And I think maybe a lesson for America to learn going forward is, like any business in America, we'll do a financial audit. Maybe it's time we start doing an audit on what people actually do with the money we send them. What actually happens with the money that's sent to war-torn regions? Does it actually end up, does it put bread in the mouths of children? Does it put a coat on the back of a child in the middle of a freezing Azerbaijani winter storm? Does it allow a mother to look her son in the eye and say, I've got food for you tomorrow morning. We're going to make it. Somebody's coming. Or does it fund ammunitions that ends up in the wrong hands, that end up killing the very people that should be protected? Big questions should be asked of every U.S. administration, because it's a neglect. It's adults behaving in irresponsible ways, and then children suffer around the world. Also here in our country, children suffer because adults do very, very stupid things. Maybe a different kind of suffering, but a suffering nonetheless. Thank you so much. God bless you. It's an honor to meet you. You know, I'm struck by you, and I want to speak life over you for a minute. You're talking about being in a war-torn region. You're talking about being a child. You're talking about being disfranchised from your home. You're talking about being a journalist. You're talking about being silenced as a journalist. You're talking about losing your church, your community, your culture. You're talking about your language being threatened. And you're sitting here and you're smiling. And there's hope in your eyes. There's pain in your eyes. A lot of pain. But there's still a smile, and I believe that smile comes from hope. And so you're a warrior. You're a modern day warrior. You're a voice I think that the world needs to hear. And maybe people with freedom that can get in their car today and go get food and have 150 choices in the next 10-mile radius in America to pick what they eat, that think their lives are so very difficult. Need to maybe for a minute slow down for a second and understand that there's a child saying, hey, will I survive through the night? Yes. And so both here in the U.S., but definitely in war-torn areas. So God bless you. Thank you very much. I want to thank you for watching this. I want you to pray about how you have an influence. I'll give you an example. You apply pressure on your elected officials. You apply pressure on your congressmen and your senators in your state, your congressmen and your senators in the U.S. Capitol. You ask them to become responsible with what God gave America to steward. Our money, our resources, your tax dollars, your vote, and you're asking these politicians to become responsible with what we're doing and specifically how we treat children. Because if we focus on the children, we'll take care of the parents, both here in the U.S., and there are atrocities happening in 2024. There's genocide, there's ethnic cleansing happening. We could have 100 of these shows. We could talk to the South Sudanese. We could talk to the Christians in Turkey. You could talk to a community that lost their nation, that are now living in Armenia, but still dreaming of going back home, attacked by Azerbaijan. Not in distant history, today. You're talking about bad forces doing bad things, and we need to focus on what role we play, and definitely not funding the wrong side of the argument. I also want to thank Patriot Mobile, the only Christian conservative cell phone provider in the United States that fight the good fight, that put your money back to work for good and not working against you. We were just talking about not funding the wrong side of the war. Well, Patriot Mobile doesn't fund the wrong side of the culture war. They actually fight the right side of the culture war. Liberty, justice for all, freedom, pro-Constitution, pro-First Amendment, pro-Second Amendment, pro-values, pro-freedom of speech. So why don't you check out Patriot Mobile and mention the bottom line. If you're a veteran, you're going to have free activation. They will buy you out of your contract. Keep your phone, get a new phone, keep your number, get a new number. They use all the major cell phone towers. But at least you know monthly, and I believe they'll beat the price you pay at the moment. When you pay that $1, it's not going to be reassigned to something like Planned Parenthood or something that does not agree with your values. So check out patriotmobile.com, storyvillecoffee.com. Help us rescue as many children from slavery. Siranush, thank you very much again. God bless you. Appreciate you. Talk to you guys next time.